Hello, everybody. So it's me, Argent, here, and I'm back with my frequent co host, Serp Kerp, aka the artist formerly known as Nazbol Gang, our resident Russia expert. And it's been a long time coming. We've both kind of been busy to start with stuff, but we're going to talk about the Ukraine Russia crisis, a bit about what's happening, the background, and where we think it's going. Hey, Serp, good to have you on, man.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I just want to start off by saying that, I occasionally, I guess, like, as you said, like a Russia watcher. I don't, my channel isn't fully devoted to that, but I do tend to watch them. As far as the other major powers of the world, I watch Russia the most.
You have a
But
scholarly interest in it.
Yeah, I've read a lot of books about the last 30 to 40 years of their history since the Brezhnev era. I'm
Hmm.
going to go back and try and read earlier eras to get more context as well. But just something that I find so interesting about what is going on is that many of the other Russia watchers in the English speaking world called this one wrong. I called it wrong, of course. I'll
I
admit
called it
right here,
wrong
I was
too.
wrong. I didn't think that this would happen, but it happened.
What did you think was going to happen?
I didn't think that they would invade. I thought that it was the West was grandstanding, or America, I should say, was grandstanding, trying to make it seem like there's going to be an invasion.
I did too. I thought if there was going to be one, Russia was just going to go in, expel Ukraine from the separatist regions, and that was going to be it. It was just going to be a short, limited war. Um, I was not expecting nearly this scope and scale. How it almost kind of felt to me was Putin said, like, it almost seemed like it was de escalating a bit, and then Putin just said, okay, we're going all in. Um, if that makes
The
sense.
fuck it,
Sorry?
the Putin fuck it kind of
Yeah,
thing.
like he almost kind of psyched them out. You know, when you're trying to get past somebody and you like go one way and then they go and then you run around them. It almost kind of felt like that. Uh,
Mhm.
Constantine says, after 8 years, it wasn't unreasonable to think this would be another fake out. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Um, but no, I was not expecting it to go this far. I tend to be the person who just thinks nothing's going to happen because we've had so many fake outs. Like in my lifetime, we've had like three or four almost wars with North Korea. There was the whole almost war with Iran that's happened like three or four times. I just kind of think it's all bluster, and I was kind of shocked that something actually happened for once.
Yes, just yeah. I mean, is the meme on poll was nothing ever happens, and then something happened.
So I will say the sheer amount of cope that this whole thing has brought up is kind of fascinating. They're still claiming that Russia's losing the war, right?
So you're under a very intense, I don't know, maybe regiment of fog of war right now, where most of the information that's coming out is like multiple days old, I would say. So the West is like saying that like Ukraine is sieging like Vladivostok, basically, that like that's the Ukrainian and Russian, or the Ukrainian and Western propaganda.
Hmm.
If you follow Russian sources don't have very intense propaganda. So it's just very hard to tell what's going on. One would assume that Russia is winning, considering they've taken vast swaths of Ukrainian territory. There doesn't seem to be any support for the idea that the Ukrainian Air Force is capable of resisting Russian air superiority. And many Ukrainian units, which were very forward positioned at the beginning of the war, look to be encircled.
Uh,
And many have already been encircled.
like I just pulled up a map, but you probably can't see it. But The east is like almost completely cut off. It's going to get cut off soon.
That map is not very good. I don't think
Oh,
that
it's
the yellow
outdated.
one from Wikipedia.
Uh huh.
Yeah, it's a very pro-Western map. I look how there's strands as opposed to red territory taken.
Right.
I would say that Russia's taken significantly more territory than is in that map.
Okay, let me see if I can find a more recent one.
Oh, should I try and send you one off Twitter?
Sure. Something else. Uh, sorry if I could. Yeah, just keep going. Um, there was just something I wanted to pull up. BBC. Have you seen how the BBC has started posting like how to use Molotov cocktails to destroy Russian tanks?
Okay, so like the Ukrainian the Ukrainian government has been arming untrained citizens to try and attack Russian units.
Hmm.
There's been leaked footage of people attempting to throw Molotov cocktails on armored vehicles and being killed by Russians in defense. There is various. So, do you remember a few days ago when supposedly Russia was entering Ukraine?
Hmm.
It's highly rumored that Russian forces were not entering Ukraine, and that in fact that there was widespread looting in the city, and that the Ukrainian citizens armed with weapons from their own government were killing each other, and that there were ethnic Russian pogroms.
Hmm.
So today or last night, a famous MMA fighter of Russian origin who was living in Ukraine was tortured, and videos were posted all over the internet. And this was like a Russian pogrom of Russian citizens living in Ukraine.
So is that by the Azov Battalion or is that by someone else?
I don't know if it's the Azov Battalion or it's just there's other right wing. There's other of these Banderite groups, of course.
Hmm.
The Azov Battalion seems to be besieged in. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Melitopol.
Right.
That's where their headquarters is, but that's one of the many encirclements that Ukrainian forces have been under.
Okay, sorry. So I'm just pulling this up. So the BBC reporters have started to post guides for attacking how to attack Russian vehicles. That's some impartial journalism there. Uh, like it's, I I almost feel like the Russian government would be justified in killing BBC reporters now. Maybe that's too edgy for YouTube. But if you're going to be putting out like information on how actively to fight your army, then I kind of think you are an enemy. You don't have protection afforded to a member of the press. What do you think?
Yes.
Okay, so you'd agree with me.
Yeah, like the Western press is clearly provoking violence against. At this point, they're like provoking violence against ethnic Russians that live within Western countries. I mean, there's been cases of immigrant centers like cultural centers and Orthodox churches being vandalized.
Didn't they burn some in Sweden? Did they burn them or did they just what was it?
I don't know the
Vandalism?
full extent of the destruction. I mean, the painting of Ukrainian, the dumping of yellow and blue paint on doors and stuff like that.
Hmm. Um, so someone's asking. I do think RT is propaganda. Um, it's not propaganda, I think, in the same way, but they bought like the whole denazification thing 100% seriously. So I kind of feel. I guess there's some truth to it, but it's also, I think, mostly a troll. Um,
I mean, okay, so like Russia today is no more or less propaganda than the CDC is or the BBC is.
mhm. Um, so what was I thinking of? Yeah. Sorry, just losing my train of thought here. Um, So yeah, they're canceling basically everyone who's Russian or something or it's like Russian. They're removing the Russian teams from like FIFA games now. It's kind of reached a kind of fevered pitch at the moment. So I don't know
Well, we're
how.
in a state of danger because of virtue signaling. It's a grave threat to our nationhood, our safety. That the virtue signaling could directly result in war between NATO and or Russia. I guess Russia and Belarus, right? But
Well,
so there's a so there was a scare of NATO planes being used to aid Ukraine that occurred a few days ago, and now right now there's a second scare of this. The idea that Poland will give up Soviet era, Warsaw Pact era airplanes and send them directly to Poland somehow is in the air again. Or send them to Ukraine somehow.
right now, a lot of people have criticized me for criticizing NATO for that and said NATO was always open about the fact that they were going to be supporting Ukraine by giving them weapons, and that giving someone weapons is not the same thing as going directly to war with them. Um, and that's kind of the counter argument I've seen.
It's not, but it depends on the level of weapon system and how they're so like if you're training voluntary you it's getting to the point where there's like we're going towards expeditionary forces of Eastern Europeans, right, being sent to fight for Ukraine. And this is I resolutely oppose NATO because this is not for the benefit of the American people that we have these Baltic states. We have Poland and Bohemia and so on that have this blood revenge hatred against Russia, but don't have the ability to defend themselves, so that they're in this alliance with us, where they are starting wars as a lesser power and forcing America to fight them. That are not just the idea that having NATO within the former Warsaw Pact and within the former Soviet states themselves in the form of the Baltic states, because of Russian reaction, pulls us closer to the war. But it also pulls the West closer to the war because these people are openly suicidal revanchists who are making America and France and Britain, these greater powers, hold the bag. They're like cowardly little demis that are trying to start war with Russia for their own dumb revenge fantasies. And they don't understand how small and weak that they are, and that this expansion of NATO is terrible for us because these people are empowered to start war with Russia because of it.
So
And you know what? For your Polish viewers that have left, I don't care what you think. This doesn't support me as an American. For you to have this revanchist war against Russia with my pennies, with my tax dollars.
so okay, so you're saying as kind of an American, you don't think there should be a war. You oppose giving weapons to Ukraine and all this stuff because you don't think it benefits your country in any tangible way, and it's ultimately probably going to hurt your country due to higher energy prices, the wheat exports and the fertilizer exports.
I mean, we're at the point where there's going to be famines all over Africa, whether or not you support that, Africa, Iraq, and so on, because all of Ukraine's wheat harvesting is curtailed, right?
Hmm.
And most of Russia's exporting of wheat comes through the Black Sea. So now there's a global wheat crisis, the highest recorded prices of wheat in record. This is going to result in famines, or it may result in famines, I should say. It is projected to if it continues indefinitely. But I just want to continue, not even the arming of Ukraine, the arming of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Czechia, and Slovakia. This is undermines American security. Not simply the arming of Ukraine.
So there's two kind of counter arguments. I'm sorry for the people who are think I'm not being strong enough, but I'm trying to kind of present the counter argument, so I'm trying to be fair. So the counter argument is A, we have to protect the existing international system, and that is preventing states from annexing other states through direct conflict. And that this is particularly within Europe, where we really haven't had a major war between great powers since World War II. They don't want to go back to that. And this is a kind of a threat to what's been built post World War II and post Cold War.
So this is a schizo position, right? Because is Ukraine, is Russia, is Belarus, is Kazakhstan, should we respect these states that are created out of accident? Is Bosnia or Kosovo, are these true actual states? Or are they just sustained by the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is all just ideological conjecture to me. But I guess maybe I'm a realist, right? I don't adhere to geopolitical liberalism. It just seems to be conjecture to me. And do we even know, like, is this insane to say that Russia will directly annex Ukraine? But furthermore, does the West really adhere to this doctrine itself?
I mean, they don't really. Okay, so that's part of the issue, but then you'll have people who will say, and I guess fairly enough, we also opposed it when America invaded Iraq or America invaded Afghanistan, and we're just against.
So there's a difference between being in opposition to pushing us closer towards a geopolitical confrontation between great powers, especially as an American, where my great power gains nothing through war with Russia over Ukraine.
Right. Okay, so that's kind of, I guess, in the short term. The other thing would be kind of a domino theory, like what we saw during the Cold War, where if one place falls, then more and more will fall. And this was kind of what happened with Japan, where they beat Russia, then they were beating China, and they just figured, let's just go YOLO and take everything. So I think part of the concern is if Ukraine falls, then Russia is just going to start militarily reconquering some of these places. Like they'll go.
Yeah, but all of these places are members of NATO. Like, okay, if Belarus gets annexed by Russia, well, they were already essentially quasi-annexed on paper with the Union State. If Russia tries to invade Poland, if it tries to have, what do you call it, recreational revanchism and irredentism in the Baltic states, the United States is obliged to defend the Baltic states against Russian aggression where it stands. So, speaking, this idea of the domino theory or showing weakness towards Russia doesn't hold up, because the United States and France, Britain, Germany, and so on have shown very firm resolve to defend all the nations within NATO itself. And furthermore, they've shown intention to expand NATO to states within, the Russian near abroad, the former Soviet states, such as Moldova and Georgia now. It's just that they're stopping short of direct intervention within Ukraine itself while there is a hot war with Russia.
Right. So your point, if I can kind of summarize, is it's not going to follow that they're going to go after like Poland and Romania or the Baltic states because they're part of NATO, and it's kind of a
Ukraine is a no man's land in between NATO and Russia, which each side is agitating towards it being annexed or put into the camp of the other. Russia has clear interests there, There is a clear questionable. I mean, I guess there's a certain silliness, right, in the idea of like, is this a real state? Is it not? I'm saying Ukraine isn't a real state, but like the origins of Ukraine's statehood are 30 years old of its separation from Russia itself. So it seems very dubious from a historical perspective to say that Ukraine doesn't. Russia has no claims upon Ukrainian territory or Belarusian territory or Kazakh territory, right? It's very dubious because uh, I'm, the Kazakh state that was a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire that was over 300 years ago, and that was all west of the Dnieper.
Hmm. Well, it's also, I mean, it's hard because there's so many different perspectives on this, but a lot of people have the whole, like, a common complaint about Africa is the borders don't reflect ethnic lines, and that was kind of one of the reasons that the whole Ukrainian crisis happened, is that the borders don't reflect ethnic lines between.
Well, that's what Putin said in his speech justifying the invasion on Russian TV. That the borders created of Ukraine are very expansive and include many areas traditionally Russian or part of the Russian state, most notably Crimea and Donbass, but continuing most of the south of the country. And that he said that these areas were essentially given over to them by the Communist Party during the Soviet period because the Communist Party was actually, contrary to most Western and Central European views, was largely dominated by Ukrainians and other minorities. It was a left wing state. It was an affirmative action empire, if you will, um, where Russians were deliberately pushed down in territory which was Russian dominant, the northern area of Kazakhstan and the east, and especially the southern reaches of Ukraine, which were Russian majority areas and always were a Russian, at least for the recent history of a few hundred years, were arbitrarily had lines drawn outside of Russian territory. You have to remember that going during the Gorbachev times, that Gorbachev's attempts to save the Soviet Union during 91 was predicated on fears, and this was internationally talked about, of the Soviet Union dissolving along these artificial boundaries and the Soviet Union transforming into a Yugoslavia with nukes. We had a 30-year peace period between the collapse of the Soviet Union and our Yugoslavia with nukes that we're now living in, but we truly are living in this Yugoslavia with nukes now.
Hmm. Um. So, the other thing that's being brought up, and I guess we can move on to the colored revolutions in a bit, is basically, so our argument is that they have a consistency issue, but the accusation is we have a consistency issue because we complain about like border security, um, and our sovereignty being taken away and stuff like that, but we're okay with this happening in the Ukraine, or we're less upset about it.
So you mean, America's intervention or Western intervention within Ukrainian and Russian elections?
I mean, we can move over to that in a second, but
Specifically, it's kind of vague.
hmm, well, it's just like because we complain about how mass immigration and the elimination of borders and globalism are eroding our individual states, but we're like not super on board to try to protect the statehood and borders and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Oh, that Ukraine's territorial integrity is of greater importance than the territorial integrity of America? What is my opinion on that?
That it seems to be of less importance to us.
So Ukraine is a very confused state, right? You have the Azov Battalion, right, is a Banderite. I don't like calling them neo-Nazis. They're Banderites, right? They're Stepan Bandera's the founder of their ideology. That's who you trace it back to. They are fascist, but they are not Nazis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so you have, very real portions of the National Guard, which are fascist, but you have a Jewish president, and you have like all this left-wing pro-European Union stuff and this right-wing Western Ukrainian revanchism and oppression of Russian minorities. It's a very confused state with very confused borders. It's a very unstable state. If we want to talk about comparing the various East Slavic republic, the three East Slavic republics that gained their independence after the fall of the Soviet Union, truly only the Russian Federation under Vladimir Putin has had a new order built. Ukraine has been a consistent chaos, and Belarus is essentially a rump state of the Soviet Union.
Was Belarus ever independent in any form prior to?
During like the era of Muscovy, right, there were Belarusian city-states.
Right, I feel like Ukraine has a better claim to have
prior to the unification of Russia under the Rorik. Is it the Rorik dynasty?
Rurikids?
Yes.
Because I think Ukraine has a better claim to have previously been an independent nation than Belarus. Okay, so let's move on. So the complaint is that, okay, so from Russia's standpoint, a whole bunch of Russian pro-Russian governments were in a lot of these Eastern European or Central Asian or Caucasian countries, and they were overthrown in colored revolutions. Do you want to maybe give the definition of colored revolution?
So a colored revolution is supposed to be the Eastern idea of a colored revolution, right? The Russian critical idea of a colored revolution is that you have this blitz, this very fast blitz of an organization under simple banners, very simple slogans, which replaces a government essentially overnight, in a way which, according to Western media sources, is grassroots, but is so well organized so quickly that it cannot be, by definition, grassroots. These revolutionary bodies often use street violence, especially in the Euromaidan revolution of 2014 in Ukraine, excessive use of street violence to force out governments which are loyal to Russia and post-Soviet integration. Especially, they're trying to prevent post-Soviet economic integration between Russia and the near abroad states, and to a lesser extent, Serbia.
Well, the idea, I think, was to try to prevent the Eurasian Union from actually being formed as like a rival to the EU.
Yes.
Because most of the countries that were going to join the Eurasian Union had their governments overthrown. Like, I know Ukraine was going to join.
So this begins with the bulldozer revolution in 2000. Then you have the Rose Revolution in Georgia. 2003, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. 2004, the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. 2005. And this, they put in Middle Eastern revolutions here as well. Mm-hmm. There's various attempts at revolutions in Belarus, the Grape Revolution in Moldova. There was another Kyrgyz revolution in 2010, right? Just a lot of
there's the recent Armenian one,
Armenian revolution, and which you would assume that makes Russia afraid, because a close ally of Russia has this velvet revolution in 2018, which results in the pro-Russian party being thrown out and immediately Turkish forces take advantage of that, and Azerbaijan engages in a war with Armenia, and Armenia loses most of its large portions of its territory it previously
Okay,
held.
so that happened right before the war. Um,
That happened 2 years before the war, right?
oh, the Colored
So in
Revolution.
2018, the war happened in 2020.
Right.
So immediately prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you have in the attempted slipper revolution in Belarus after the 2020 presidential election in Belarus, where there was widespread chaos in Belarus, and when Lukashenko quelled this chaos, then the West, the United States, and its various allies declare that Lukashenko is not the sitting president. They honor the woman that was running against him and declare her the sitting president. And now they operate a Belarusian government in exile, and that they claim that if Lukashenko ever goes into like the European Union or America or Canada or so on, that they'll arrest him and put her in power, right? And then you have the revolution in Armenia in 2018, followed by the war where Armenia loses.
Was Russia
Then in
less
2020,
inclined to try to help Ukraine out? Sorry, Armenia out during that because of the Colored Revolution? Like,
yes, because the colored revolution was anti-Russian, right?
do you think if the old government was still in power, they would have intervened, or that
I
would have?
don't think I don't think Turkey would have armed Azerbaijan to the extent that they did, and that Azerbaijan would have not taken the offensive in the war had there not been the colored revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, was it 2020 or 2021? Widespread electoral fraud in Moldova, which results in Moldova swinging towards the European Union.
Um, so the counter argument to this is that the existing governments that were overthrown were extremely corrupt and incompetent, and they had been kind of imposed on them by Russia using either the Russian minorities, financial pressure, oil pressure, and that these represent a genuine nationalistic um, feeling that they just don't want Russia to be running them anymore. Um,
Yes and no. So the West and Russia is doing the same thing, that they're putting immense strain on all of these governments to choose them or choose the West. And we shouldn't dismiss pro-Western sentiment between in many of these countries, but we should be questioning the elections and their validity because there's a lot of money coming in from outside, right?
well, to be fair on both sides, I don't know how much, regardless of who wins these elections, you can say they're legitimate. I don't think there really exists a democratic, if we're going to say democracy is legitimate, a process for these countries to choose national self determination because the elections are just fucked. Like the pro Russian side rigs elections, the pro Western side rigs elections. The pro Western side just seems to be better at doing it, but it's I don't know. I think it depends a lot on the country. Like in the case of the Ukraine, what was the guy who got overthrown in 2014?
I'm gonna mispronounce his name. It's Victor Yushchenko was the early one.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I mean, hadn't the previous government like committed to join the EU, um, and then he reversed course? Because the
Victor uh, Yanukovych.
yeah.
So he was signing agreements to join the EU, and then the EU refused to help Ukraine with its debt, and then Russia agreed to pay off Ukrainian debts to the IMF and various international banking and borrowing agencies if he would sign economic agreements to join in, the Eurasian Union. And that's what directly resulted in Euromaidan, was him signing economic agreements to join with Russia as opposed to the EU. And that he was, in a sense, he had no other choice because the European Union wasn't going to help pay off
And
their
the
debt.
country was completely bankrupt.
Yes. Like, if they signed with the European Union, it wasn't going to help them. The association agreement.
And I mean, it would have. I imagine it would have taken them a really long time to join the EU, anyways.
I mean, I think there are numerous states that are attempting to join and haven't joined for years.
Because I mean, you have to deal with corruption. You have to have electoral integrity. None of those things
You have
exist.
to get rid of, right wing ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't have the death penalty, for instance.
Yeah, you have to get rid of. Yeah, that's true. You have to get rid of the death penalty if you want to join the EU. Um. So, it's kind of a cop out on one hand, but on the other hand, it's just kind of a recognition of reality that it's kind of almost impossible to really know about what the actual people want with regards to whether they want to be pro Russia or pro NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so someone's pointing in the chat that Yanukovych stole billions and billions of dollars from the
Yanukovych is a bad person. Like, he's a bad person. So I think that it's very difficult here because Putin and Yanukovych and all these people aren't necessarily good people either.
mhm.
It's just that you just have to pick you have to pick who you're siding with. You have to pick your sugar daddy in reality, as you said.
Well, because some countries, as I've said, are just I don't think can be fully independent because of where they're geographically located, who their neighbors are, that kind of thing. Ukraine is kind of in between, like, well, historically between like Germany and the Ottoman Empire and Russia. And at the moment, they're between the EU and Russia. And I kind of feel the two options for a state like that is to either be more or less uh, completely neutral, something like Belgium was prior to the World Wars, or Switzerland, or to be a satellite state of one of the major powers that surround it. Like, I think that's a position that Korea was in. It was surrounded by Japan, China, and Russia, and I think America was seen as being the least bad master to have because they were so distant. Um, but I could be wrong about that. However, yeah, I mean, as I've said, and people will sometimes ignore that I've said this, but I don't have any pretense that Russia is a shining beacon of Christian morality. There's massive drug, alcohol, spousal abuse, infidelity, all kinds of horrible shit goes on in Russia, but they at least have some pretense of being a Christian country. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it was you who put it. The West hates Russia because they don't worship homosexuals and black people. Um, was it you or was it Turellian who said that?
Both of us at various times in varying ways.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like I think that is kind of it. I mean, Yanukovych was extremely corrupt. I don't know. Does anybody say that uh, that he wasn't corrupt or he wasn't like a bad man?
I think it's pretty, like, pick your poison kind of thing with it. I don't think anybody ever doesn't give a caveated defending of him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was an oligarch and he stole state money.
Right. So, yeah, so then yeah, you get the Ukraine thing. So is part of the issue just this is always a problem whenever we're dealing with something, a country that is kind of has somewhat artificial borders, where there is going to be a strong localized minority that disagrees with the majority. Like, even if we'll say that the majority of the Ukraine is anti-Russian and pro-West, even if it's only like 60% of the country, but it is an issue where it's very concentrated in different regions, where like Crimea and the east and southeast of the country are very pro-Russia, and then like the west is extremely anti-Russia. So, um,
Yeah.
so somebody's saying that they just want Russia's is they just want to take Russia's oil and gas, and there's no cultural issues involved in this, and it's purely geopolitics. See, I don't think so. I think that the people who lead us are that ideologically radical, um, that they aren't
I
realists.
would, I would agree. I think that the people that lead us are, as I said before, very incompetent, but I don't think that there's any naked self interest going on. I think that they would. I mean, U.S. soldiers are being forced to go through endless hours of they, them, and ask me about my pronouns. So, like, these people aren't very pragmatic. They're very, very heavy ideologues.
Because, I mean, I do think part of it is like a boomer leftover that they were told that Russia was evil for such a long period of time, it's kind of hard to move on from that narrative. So I think that is part of it. I think part of it is a cultural thing and part of it is a geopolitical thing. I think it is just a lot of different things that kind of come together. Now, another question people have is that this is ultimately going to backfire because Europe is rapidly rearming now. Um, and the balance of forces is going to shift increasingly away from Russia in the foreseeable future as Germany and France, etc., vastly expand their military spending.
That undermines the European Union in the long run. So, yes, in the short run, let's say like 5 to 10 years. In the medium run, in the long run, no. European Union has deep internal contradictions, and much of what was holding it together was the United States was the only coherent military force um, that unified these small, or I shouldn't say small, but these states which were connected to each other and without like a real military. So the remilitarization of Europe in the short run, like this is a stronger NATO, right? Because Germany will try and rebuild its army, and Poland is rebuilding its army, and and other EU states are going to follow. But in the long run, with a remilitarized Europe, that means that Europe won't be weak and defenseless and indifferent from each other. Because I think that this demilitarization of Europe and the predominance of the United States is what lays the groundwork for European integration. And any expansion of each individual European military, even if they are training together, will result in pushing away and the undermining of European federalization and unification.
Is it partially just because like Germany will have such a dominant, like it already has a dominant position, but it will just be such a large, like it'll just be so um, much more massive. It'll start to feel like um, a German
Keep
empire.
in mind that during the collapse of the Soviet Union, this was considered a catastrophe by the West because of the annexation of East Germany by West Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is definite resentment within Central Europe against Germany economically right now, and this may increase in the future. Just yeah.
So, if I understand what you're saying is, in the short run, NATO's going to get stronger, but military buildup in the individual member states might create a more every man for himself sort of thing.
Yes.
Um,
I think it'll undermine European integration.
right. Uh, Also, we don't know how bad the economic situation is going to get in Europe with these sanctions. I mean, gas prices have skyrocketed where you live, haven't they?
They went so Thursday last week it was 338. Today it is 379 a gallon. I'm sure they're much more expensive in Canada.
Yes, Canada, generally speaking, has higher gas prices. It's just kind of hard because we sell in liters instead of gallons, so yeah, it's really it's gone up here quite a bit, and both our countries produce their own energy, at least to a certain extent. America produces oil, and Canada produces a lot of oil, but most European countries don't produce any oil. Um, I guess maybe Britain does and Norway does, and those are the only ones I can really think of um, that have any significant amount of domestic oil production. So I feel like this is going to make it a lot worse. Um,
There's already significant strain on the West for their imposition of sanctions upon the East. Um, it's just time will tell how bad it will be on the West, right?
mhm.
The Western media is saying that the Russian economy is destroyed outright, like annihilated. But
Yeah, the way
Russian
they
English
portray it.
speakers don't seem to be skeptical.
Yeah, because the way they portray it, it sounds like Russian's economy is on the brink of like total collapse. I
But
think.
the Russian economy has been, I mean, it's ditched two currencies since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Right there, the post-Soviet currency was, I believe, Russia. There was a ruble zone until '94, and Russia had to abandon that, and then abandon another ruble in '98. Um, Outside of those two abandonments of its currency, it suffered the 2008 recession and the consequences of the sanctions in 2014.
I mean, the one benefit this might do, and I'm generally speaking against having an autarkic economy, but maybe this will help to balance their economy out. Because I feel like the Russian economy is overly dependent on two things: commodities and weapons. And maybe this will help develop some of their tech industry or their industry or other stuff like that. Someone's talking about lit, liquefaction. I thought that was an exceedingly expensive process, um, and not particularly efficient. Maybe it's come a long way since the Germans tried to do that in World War II. But it's just so I think Russia, in probably the short term, will really feel this. In probably the medium to long term, I'm not really sure how it's going to go, to be
It's
honest.
very difficult. I mean, so if you want to return to the character of Putin, right?
Hmm.
Putin is this very interesting character. I'm reading Dugin's book, Putin versus Putin, and he's probably I don't know. I'm not that pro Dugin, but he is more optimistic towards Putin from a Russian nationalist perspective. Um, but you really have this internal contradiction where he's the one, which is a liberal who is pushing the country towards democracy, but he's forced into these situations where he has to be a nationalist. He has to push forward, and that by cutting Russia economically off from the West, you're really pushing Russia away from integration and liberalization and pushing it back towards some kind of neo-Eurasian or neo-Soviet mindset.
Well, I
You're
mean,
undermining Russian liberalization economically and culturally and pushing them towards a non-Western view of themselves.
Well, it's like because Hollywood's banning all their movies, and that's kind of the greatest exporter of American culture is through stuff like movies and music and video games and stuff like that. And if they're suddenly going to go and cut that off, and then they're going to kick Russia off international payments, and they're going to kick Russia out of everything. Past a certain point, they just don't have any leverage. It's just they're firing all their bullets right away. And to be honest, I don't think even if Russia withdrew from the Ukraine, they would lift any of this. Maybe that's just me being like paranoid or something. I kind of feel like Russia would have to cave in and like dissolve the Union State and legalize gay marriage and dissolve like the amount of stuff I think they would realistically have to do for the sanctions to be significantly lifted is just something that's not even really possible in the current environment. I don't know, maybe being over the top. What do you think?
I mean, does the leadership want the sanctions to be removed? I mean, having the sanctions in place legitimizes the leadership.
Well, I think it's that. I also think the like the cancel culture, I don't see how that's going to in any way help the West's position in Russia because a lot of it has nothing to do with Putin. Like banning cats, I say as Reigns is next to me. I don't get how that like helps the war with Ukraine. All it really seems to do is just prove whatever paranoia Putin's been trying to stoke. So if we're assuming that Putin is a paranoid schizophrenic who wants to start a global nuclear war, which is what CNN told me. So the best way we're going to do that is to just shit on the Russian people, shit on their culture, shit on their history, and turn them into like the arch nemesis of us. Then that's somehow going to prove like the xenophobic fear mongering wrong, I guess.
I mean, how does anti-Semitism legitimizes Israel? Mm-hmm. So anti-Russianism is going to legitimize any authoritarian leanings of the Russian state.
So I can't really think of an instance where sanctions actually made the government weaker. Maybe like blockades do, but sanctions I feel like in most cases just makes the government's control over the country stronger because it makes the population depend upon direct handouts from the state.
Let's look at there's a Wikipedia list of nations that the U.S. has targeted for sanctions.
It's like Cuba, Iran, Vietnam, probably Laos and Cambodia.
Every single case, it strengthened the central government and made the people more anti-Western.
Probably Venezuela.
North Korea, Cuba, Iran, Syria, Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you had cripplingly aggressive sanctions and against like weak states like Iraq, right? Like Saddam wasn't toppled by them.
Saddam stood in power like more than a decade after they did that.
For 12 years.
I don't think there was any real sign that the Ba'athist government was going to be overthrown anytime soon when we reached 2003. I'd almost, if we're just talking about color revolutions, could you argue that America funding ISIS to overthrow the Syrian government kind of counts under the colored revolution banner?
I don't want to discuss Middle Eastern colored revolutions.
Okay.
I'm just not as aware in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, there are many examples of this in the Middle East. And like the war in Syria, to a certain extent, right, it was interpreted as a attack on a Russian ally by the West.
Right. So I don't know what wound up happening, but Biden was saying he was going to sanction India because India buys weapons from Russia. And my understanding is has fairly cordial relations with the U.S. at the moment. So I don't really see how. Maybe I think India might have turned on Russia at this point, but if they were to do that and alienate Russia, India, and I guess by extension China, that's a massive economic population resource power block. That's
I mean, this is just mulling threat, like aimless threats.
yeah, but it's
To
destroying a
sanction
relationship.
India is insane. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, like we were discussing, ideology. We should consider ideology very important towards the aims of the state. These people are not realists; they are heavy ideologues. Like you don't cut off 4-year-olds' penises pragmatically.
Yeah, I mean it's gonna be it is kind of a mess, and I just don't know how far it's gonna go. I wonder if do you think there's any chance that like Poland or one of the Baltic states will like actively try to start a war? Like they'll try to attack Russia or something?
I mean, that's my fear. I mean, right? That's my fear. I mean, they're at that point where they just assume that America is going to protect them no matter what they do.
Right. So what do you think Russia's gonna? Do you think Russia's just gonna demilitarize Ukraine under a pro-Russian government, or are they gonna annex like the eastern half of the country? Because I really don't know what the end game is here.
I made the video about the end game, but I mean, it's just kind of up in the air. I mean, the further the West reacts negatively, the more aggressive we should assume Russia will be pushed towards their end game. Um, I mean, maybe there is truth. Maybe like, maybe like their trucks are being destroyed and the advance is like halted, and then we're gonna have a like indefinite multi-year siege of Kiev or something, right? That's what the West wants. I mean, so like if this is a Iraq war kind of situation where where Russia comes in and replaces the government, you could see large sections of Russia or Ukraine be annexed by Russia, or that's kind of the things that we have up in the air. Regime change, either this will be in a 2003 Iraq war, regime change, and then depending on how far Russia takes of Ukrainian territory, some kind of insurgency, or B, Russian advance has been curtailed, and then this will be like a giant Yugoslav war with like Kiev and Kharkov playing like a Sarajevo situation for like multiple years. That's what the West wants to see. As far as like Putin's intentions, we could look back at Chechnya, the Second Chechen War, which would be Russia comes in, destroys the Ukrainian ability to resist Russia, and then puts in some kind of puppet who will fight the insurgency on the behalf of Russia. It seems that the Georgian war of take back the Donbass and threaten the capital, that's out. And it may have not have been out at the beginning. That might have been the initial war goal, as Russia and Ukraine have entered into negotiations within a week of the beginning of the war, but they seem to be going nowhere. So the whole Georgian take back the Donbass, threaten Kiev, to force them into peace seems to be off the table. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question. And it's not a deflection.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends how long it takes. I kind of feel like if the Ukraine had kind of made concessions at the very beginning of this, I think the more Russia holds and the better position they're in, the more that they're going to demand. Who knows? They might have just accepted demilitarization and a guarantee to not join NATO at the beginning of this. But if Russia is going to go in and do that kind of stuff, then it's just kind of go on for uh, yeah. But like, there's the hope that Russia's losing this war, and that because Russia hasn't won yet. But I mean, Desert Storm and like the initial Iraq War took over a month, and those are kind of seen as the model of really rapid things. We're not even are we
We're 10 days in, right?
we're 10 days in. I kind of expect large portions of the Ukrainian army to collapse at some point in the foreseeable future due to poor morale, or just they're encircled by Russia and they're cut off from their supply route. Um, so I do think that it's quite possible that we'll see some sort of collapse of at least part of the Ukrainian army. But they've been fighting a lot harder than I thought they were going to first. It's just kind of impossible to know because the West is portraying it as if they've already like taken Moscow. RT makes it sound like they've taken Kiev, and most of the news sites have everything behind a paywall. So I'd actually been watching India today, so I thought maybe the Indian coverage was a bit more neutral um, than what we had to work with. How long do you think before they take uh, Kiev?
Do they intend on? I mean, so the eastern arm is united with the southern approach through Chernobyl. Um, I mean, there's one highway that's you can escape from right now.
Mm-hmm. I
I'm gonna
mean,
send you a picture of the situation around Kiev.
sure. Now, do you want to talk about because you've been talking about it a lot, the alleged war crimes of the Ukrainian government?
So, what's supposedly happening, according to the Russians, pro-Russian sources, right, is that Ukraine is intensively using the tactics the Hamas uses, which is human shields, where Ukrainian units will deliberately put themselves within or next to, these defenseless civilian areas of schools and hospitals and so on. They're also so the West is so the negotiations are supposed to allow are supposed to be allowing Ukrainian citizens, refugees, to leave besieged cities, to open highways for Ukrainian refugees to leave besieged cities. According to Western sources, Russians are agreeing to these, and uh, they are not following through on them because they are shelling the cities, which prevents them from having these highways being used to evacuate people. According to the pro-Russian sources, the Azov battalion and other paramilitaries are directly preventing people from leaving so they can be used as human shields.
No, I do think the case of Hamas is a little different, just because there's really nowhere else that they can operate.
It's so densely populated.
Yeah, and the Israelis have such an overwhelming advantage. Ukraine doesn't really have the issue of population density. I get the argument on one hand that on one hand there's the argument that yes, everyone should be dying to defend their country. It's good that the Ukrainian government's handing out weapons to the people. On the other hand, I think just what's probably going to happen, especially if they're fighting mechanized forces, is they're just going to get slaughtered, and it's just going to really increase the death toll without really significantly slowing the Russians. Uh, what do you think?
So what are you talking about?
Them just giving weapons to the military to random civilians.
I don't I don't think it really went anywhere. I mean, you could listen to the pro-Russian sources of there was no battles inside Kiev, and it was like death squads that were, killing innocent people, and it was looting and so on. It's like that could be what's going on. I just kind of think that, like, I don't think that the Ukrainian, they're not well trained enough. I mean, to resist without training, as civilians. And it seems like from some reports that when Ukrainians try to protest, that Russian forces are ordered to use tear gas and police methods to disperse crowds.
Right. Um, so yeah, I don't really think, I don't know. I don't think Russia will go into Western Ukraine. I could be wrong. I just don't think that's really in the cards. Um, but that could just be me. So, I think we covered most of it. Maybe we'll just take a couple questions from the chat, and then we can. 1 second, I unplugged my headset by accident. Someone's asking, Serp, do you look at more than one source?
Numerous sources.
Okay. I'm just looking. If anyone has a question or two for us, Ukrainian Voltstrom battalions. So people are saying that Russia is bombing pro-Russian neighborhoods.
Russia is bombing pro-Russian neighborhoods.
Yes.
Yeah, I get, like, Western sources say that the Russian Air Force is just killing civilians left and right.
I mean, I don't.
I mean, that's what the U.S. did in Serbia during the Kosovo War.
Well, didn't they destroy the entire civilian infrastructure during Desert Storm?
Yeah, I don't know. They haven't used strategic bombing. They've been used, like, cruise missiles and precision guided ordnance pretty excessively.
Mm-hmm. So it makes an interesting point. How long till the media stops caring?
I hope pretty soon, because when the media stops caring and there's less of, like, the people saying, like, all this stuff of, like, Poland's going to send in their fighter jets and Turkey's going to block off all Russian shipping and so on.
You have the BBC trying to show people how to destroy Russian vehicles. I mean, the media is pretty strongly crying for war, either directly or indirectly. They're really trying to escalate this, I think, as much as they
if
can.
Russian artillery is attacking civilian positions, like, that's probably true. Like, I'm not gonna debate that. I'm just saying, it seems that the Russian Air Force has been using a lot of precision ordnance as opposed to saturation bombing.
I mean, the civilian death toll doesn't seem as high as some of the wars.
Like, the thing you have to realize is, like, do the Russian armies advancing view Ukrainians as a foreign enemy? A lot of the video footage seems to suggest that Russian forces are not trying to kill citizens. That they're very sometimes the citizens are indifferent to the Russians advancing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe this is cherry picked, but I hope that, okay, so the people that are saying that I'm only listening to pro-Russian sources, right? I fronted the possibility that, that supply columns are being ambushed, and that this has slowed down Russian advance, and that this could turn into a long Yugoslav war sort of thing. So I think that that's what Western sources are saying, or the whole Ukraine is winning, like, whatever the hell Vosh is saying of, like, Moscow has been taken and Vladivostok is under siege stuff.
Mm-hmm. Um, we should listen to India today. I mean, the other funny thing, and I always bring this up, is a lot of the Western sources have paywalls on their website. So you couldn't read it even if you tried. They just have it blocked. Um, or stuff like that. So, I don't know. I kind of feel we just don't really have very much reliable information about this. I
It's a pretty heavy fog of war, right? You can't tell, and everything that happens gets confirmed days later after you initially hear it. So like you hear stuff of like the Russians have taken X city on one day, and then 5 days later you hear
It's
that
happened
like
with
they're still
Kharkov a
fighting on
couple
it.
times.
Yeah, they're supposed to have surrounded Kharkov multiple times, and yeah.
So yeah, they surrounded Kharkov. Um, but yeah, the only other case I can think of where the fog of war is this bad was the Yellow Vests.
Hmm.
Like that was a complete and total media blackout after the first couple of days. So, anyways, I think that covers most of it. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, man?
Let's just hope that there isn't like another Sarajevo. Let's hope that there isn't mass rape and stuff that happened in Yugoslavia in the 90s.
Okay.
And let's pray for the people of that country.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, man. Okay, everybody. So that was the stream. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to, I don't, be a little balanced and kind of try to do at least some counterpoints. But I mean, it is really difficult to say at the moment. There's a lot of fog of war. We don't really know what's happening in a lot of cases. I'm sure all this stuff will probably come out years later, but this is kind of how it is at the